We were just having a conversation about the temperature and the feeling of the air here in the sanctuary. It's been a funny weekend of funny weather the whole summer, right? And now here in the sanctuary, it's a combination of just right and a little stuffy. So here we are. Welcome back to Sunday School. We're going to be continuing the study we started last year on hearing the voice of God and just kind of continually asking the questions. How did God speak to the people in the Bible? And does God still speak today? Right. And then if God does still speak today, how does how God spoke to the people in the Bible inform me about how he might speak to me? So that's kind of where we've been. Um, so what I want us to do is I want us to do what already I'm hearing this morning is a nigh impossibility. We're going to try to crank backwards in our brains into the deepest recesses of our memory, like June, right? And then back to September, and try to think for just a couple of minutes and review some of the ways that God spoke to the people that we in the Old Testament that we've studied so far. We've studied the books of the Pentateuch. We've studied the books of the law, checking out the non-writing prophets. Then we got into the writing prophets. We studied the major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And now today, we're going to start the minor prophets, and we're just going to do the books in order. So we're going to start with Hosea. So I want us to think, as we think about the books of the Pentateuch, particularly the book of Genesis, how did God speak to Adam, speak to Cain, speak to Noah, speak to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob? What kinds of things were similar and what kinds of things were different? Well, with Adam, he's walking through the garden, right? It gives us some kind of sense of the presence of God being perceivable. That we'll just phrase it that way, perceivable in the garden, and that he was speaking with Adam, certainly audibly. I'm not sure that it's necessarily the case with Cain. That sense of God's presence is there. It could be, but also I would say it was audible that Cain could hear God and respond. Right? You go both cases with Adam and with Cain. You get a sense of God says something, Adam or Cain, or they respond back, and then God, it's a conversation. There's a back and forth. What about when we get to say like Noah or Abraham? Pretty audible, right? Still with Noah, God has an audible conversations that go back and forth. With Abraham, God has audible conversations and they go back and forth. Does anything different happen with Abraham? Okay, God shows up as a mortal person, apparently mortal person, right? There's the just before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. There's these three figures that come and speak and visit with Abraham. They eat with Abraham, then one stays, and apparently the two others go down in to check out what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. And again, there's the back and forth conversation. Uh, so I like to ask this question because I like to ask this question because we as human beings we get very rigid, right? And we think what works for me, what works for you, right? The way that things happen for me, or the way that things happen for you. Um, and so, what is different about what happened with Abraham versus what happened, say, with Noah or with Cain or Adam or whatever? Maybe I'm not asking it right because we just really addressed what is different. Go ahead. Okay, God makes a promise and cuts a covenant. He has a covenant with with Adam. He has a covenant with Noah, and then there's a covenant with with Abraham as well. Um, do you remember when Noah? I'm sorry, wow, I'm getting all my guys wrong. When Abraham, when God makes the covenant with Abraham, what God does? Okay, so Abraham falls into a sleep, and he has it's that account actually starts off with the God giving him a vision of the whole land and saying, "I'm going to give all this to you." Then Abraham falls asleep, and God gives him a dream of this sacrifice that he'd set up, and God going between the cut animals that he'd laid out for the sacrifice. And God says, if I do not keep the terms of this covenant, may I be like these animals. All right. So it's really interesting that God, as in the position of the sovereign king, because he's the God and Abraham's just a dude, um, takes what I'll call the submissive position in that covenant. Typically, in the ancient world, when a covenant is made, the suzerain king presides, and the vassal king or the submissive king is the one who provides the sacrifice, the animals that they would cut in half. And then, as the terms of the covenant were pronounced, this vassal king would walk between the cut animals, showing the suzerain king, if he, the vassal king, the lesser king, the submissive king, the subject, fails to keep up his terms of the covenant, may he be like these dead animals. God takes on the vassal role, which is astounding. Basically, God is saying, I'm the one who's going to keep this covenant up. You can't do it. It's pretty awesome. So, if Abraham, just having had a vision of God walking through the dead animals, were to have a conversation with Noah and said, Noah, guess what? I just had a vision from God and a dream. And in that dream, God said that he would take on the punishment if the covenant is not kept. What do you think of that? Given how we tend to think about our own experiences as normative, how would Noah respond to Abraham? Probably say, you're nuts. No, 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 no. God doesn't talk like that, right? When God speaks to you, he gives you clear directions. He tells you to build an ark and get the animals and line them all up 2 by 2, except for the clean animals. You get 7 of those and get it. And he tells you the size, and he tells you what kind of wood to use, and he tells you to close it up. He gives you all the orders. He makes it really clear, and you do what you're told, right? Because look, that's how God even talked to Cain, and that's how God talked to Adam. We've all heard the stories. God doesn't talk in dreams, because we tend to think that what has happened to us is normative, which means it's the normal way to do it. And I talked quite a bit last year about how my mom was, I don't know if she still talks this way. She hasn't had one of these conversations with me in a long time, but she would talk about how God would talk to her while she was vacuuming. That she'd be vacuuming and God would just reveal stuff to her, make things plain to her. Right? So does that mean that what we all need to start doing is vacuuming more frequently? Yes. There might be other reasons that we should vacuum more frequently, right? Like, we have 2 dogs and 2 cats. We can't keep up with it. It's impossible. They just come behind us dropping fur on the ground, right? But thinking what we're looking at here in all these passages are the many ways that God speaks. And they're not all the same. And sometimes, like we're going to be looking at in just a couple of minutes, they're pretty far out. And so we want to stop thinking of the ways that God speaks to us as normative and start realizing that God speaks to us the way that we will listen, the way that is particular to us. So what about, how did God speak to other people in the Bible? Like, how did God speak to Moses and Joshua, particularly Moses. He spoke to him through some physical objects. Yeah, yeah, like the burning bush. Yeah, one of the coolest passages in the Bible is God says to all other people, I speak in visions and dreams. You know, He'll send prophets to the people of Israel, but to Moses, my servant, I speak to face, as one man speaks to another, as a friend speaks to a friend. A really just intimate, close relationship. So close that when Moses would go have conversations with God, he'd come away with his face shining, radiant. And the people of Israel were like, cover it up. It's freaking us out. And he'd have to wear a veil when he until the glory had faded away. How about Joshua? How does God speak to Joshua? Joshua is a little interesting. One of the things we saw with Joshua is God does speak to Joshua. But what's Joshua's problem? Anybody remember? Remember they attacked. How did the attack on Jericho go? Remember the attack of Jericho? Right. Kind of Joshua goes to the Lord, and the Lord gives him directions, and then Joshua goes and follows the directions. How does the attack on the city of Ai go? Spelled AI. Not good. Why? They didn't seek God. So sometimes Joshua is neat because Joshua is a lot more like you and me, I think. When something looks big and something looks insurmountable, like Jericho, which is this humongous walled city, we go to God and say, God, this is impossible. We can't do it. I don't know what to do. I need your help. But then they go and they look at a city like Ai, and Ai looks kind of wimpy. And the generals and the scouts say to Joshua, we don't even need to send the whole army, just a couple hundred people, and we'll be all good. And we're like, oh, we don't need the Lord for this one. So we'll go do it myself. And when we go do it ourselves, like Joshua and the armies, we fall on our faces. So in Joshua, we start seeing, or maybe we don't start seeing, but we see that God is there when we go to him, but he's not always going to butt in. He wants us to come to him. Yeah. Yeah, that encounter with the commander of the Lord's army is awesome. It's one of my favorite passages in Scripture because Joshua has a couple of my favorite passages in Scripture, but that encounter with the commander of the Lord's armies is really cool because it appears that Joshua doesn't recognize this guy as some manner of angelic being. He just must look like a regular guy. And so Joshua comes upon this soldier and he says, whose side are you on? Are you with us or are you with your enemies? And the commander of the Lord's army says, I'm not with either one. I'm the commander of the Lord's armies. I'm with the Lord. And so the question really is not the commander of the Lord's army is not the question's not whose side I'm on, bub. The question is whose side are you on? Because if you're on your own side, you're not on the Lord's side, you're on the wrong side. You're setting yourself up, which is kind of what you see sort of like tumbles through the book of Joshua. How did God remember go into the book of Judges and consider any of the judges, but mostly God does a lot of talking. There's more talking with Gideon than with most of the others, I would say, or many of the others. So to remember how God spoke to Gideon. Yeah, yeah. With Gideon, God speaks a lot of confirmation, right? That Gideon will hear something from the Lord and kind of go, do you really mean that? Well, let me check it out. And so he's like, well, I don't know if I should really, if you're really speaking to me. So I'm going to put a fleece out, and I can never remember which order it goes. I'll put this fleece out on the ground. And if the ground is wet and the fleece is dry, then I know you're speaking. He wakes up in the morning and the ground is wet and the fleece is dry. And he says, okay, just want to double check. Right? And so I'm going to put the fleece out again. And this time, if the fleece is wet and the ground is dry, or reverse whatever I said before, then I know it's you. And then later on, it's I want you to go and attack the can't remember the name of the bad guys now. They're the Midianites. I want you to go and attack the Midianites. Oh Lord, I don't know if you've given me enough people to go and attack the Midianites. All right, well, you go sneak up to the camp. And when you go sneak up to the camp, you'll hear. Right. And so then he goes and he hears that one of the people in the camp has had a dream from the Lord of a giant, I think it's a barley loaf rolling down the hill and eradicating the camp. And then Gideon knows, oh, okay, yeah, the Lord's on my side. We're going to go do this. Right. He speaks to Gideon he gives him clear instructions, and then Gideon is either insecure, either in himself or in the Lord, and has to get confirmation over and over again. And how about Samuel? Samuel is the last of the judges. And what we might, and really he's also the prophet that leads into the coming of the kings. Remember how God spoke to Samuel, especially in his first call. And what does he sound like? Yeah, he said he wakes up. Samuel wakes up there in the tabernacle. They're sleeping in the tabernacle, and he wakes up hearing God call to him, but he thinks it's Eli. And so he says, yes, wakes Eli up. Poor old man Eli's trying to finally get some good sleep, right? He wakes Eli up, and Eli's like, I'm not calling you. Go to sleep, kid. And so the kid goes back to sleep, and then God calls him again and over again. And finally, Eli goes, oh, it's the Lord. If he calls you again, say, here I am, your servant. I am listening. And then God calls him and speaks to him. And God also seems to speak to Eli very clearly. And a lot of these times, we're saying it's audible. I tend to think that when we say God's voice is audible, unless it's otherwise noted in the text, it at least, bare minimum, appears to be audible to the intended hearer, right? So Samuel believes that he's hearing the Lord, but it could be that God's speaking directly to his mind. Because we don't see, like when God's speaking to Samuel, say about inaugurating a king. We see that the people are clamoring for a king, and there appears to be a crowd of people clamoring for a king. And Samuel saying, no, no, no. And then God speaks to Samuel, and there's no note in the passage that the people heard the voice of God or that the people heard a sound or anything like that, like we saw like in Exodus 19, when God speaks from the mountain and the people all freak out and they don't want God to talk to them anymore. And they'd say, no, Moses, you go talk to God and come tell us what he says. So is it possible that they're actually hearing, but only the intended recipient particularly? Yes, it is, because God can do that, right? Is it possible that God's speaking directly into their mind? Yes, it is, because God can do that. Is it possible that everybody's hearing a sound and only the prophet can interpret it? Yes, it is, because God can do that. So unless otherwise noted, I think we need to leave ourselves open for those three possibilities, any one of those. And because they all will ultimately mean the same thing, that the prophet heard a message from the Lord. All right, now let's shift our gears a little bit. And what is the difference between a vision and a dream? You're awake for one and you're sleeping for the other. And which is which, just in case we're confused, Hillary? Yeah, that's about it. That's the difference, right? Is that God speaks through visions and dreams. We see that in the Old Testament. We saw that with like Joseph in the book of Genesis, and we see it a number of times throughout the Old Testament, even with people like Nebuchadnezzar, who's a foreign king. That guy, that soldier in the camp of the armies of Midian. He does it with his prophets. He does it even in the New Testament. We'll see as we get into the New Testament. So a vision happens when you're awake. Something happens, and God seizes your perception one way or the other, and you see something. Happened to Isaiah when he's serving in the temple, and then all of a sudden, as he's serving in the temple, God shows up in the temple in Isaiah chapter 6. We see it in Ezekiel. Ezekiel's walking along the Kebar Canal, minding his own business, and then he sees this living creature, the four heads and the four wheels and the spinning all around and every direction it faces and all sorts of stuff. Four living creatures that look like that, with the throne of the Lord supporting the throne of the Lord above them. And he keeps on going back to, or that vision keeps, or aspects of that vision keep recurring. Then dreams happen when we're asleep, which we're aware of. And God sometimes uses those dreams to speak to us, which means they must be a dream that we remember, right? It would be useless for God to give us directions in a dream that we forget. So I know I've heard a lot of people talk about with concern that the Lord is speaking to them, that they write down their dream when they wake up in the morning. They write down their dreams to take a peek at it and see, is this something the Lord's guiding me in? All right. Next to last question. Let's consider the major prophets. We spent quite some time in the major prophets at the end of the Sunday school year. And so how did God speak to the four major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel? Question first, why do we call them major prophets? That's it. Their books are longer. That's why they're called the major prophets. Originally, when they were written on scrolls, the major prophets, their prophecies filled an entire scroll, and the minor prophets basically filled one scroll. If they were all written on one scroll, and that was all the room you needed. So, how did God speak to these four prophets? Okay, yeah, we'll talk about some of the wacky stuff in just a minute. Yeah. Yeah. He spoke to them with visions. He spoke to them with dreams. He spoke to them directly. Sometimes he would take them to look at something, right? Like Jeremiah, God says, go down the street, go to the potter's house and watch him work. I'm going to talk to you about it. Right. And he goes and he watches the potter do his work. And God, as he does it, God speaks a lesson to him for the people. Yes, he also sends angelic messengers. Yeah, to speak to them. Absolutely. Which he also, there's, right, we talked about this last year. What's the deal with angels and God? Like when it says the angel of the Lord, or an angel came and spoke. Angel means messenger. Yeah. Right. It's sent, the angels come, a messenger in the ancient world comes with the authority of the one who sent him. And honestly, I was thinking about this. That is still somewhat true today. If your son gets a wild hair across their backside one day and decides to get in a car with his buddy and drive down the road with a baseball bat and hit mailboxes, what happens? Hillary says, wait till I get my hands on him. What else happens? Police. What kind of crime is it? It's a federal crime. It is a federal crime. Interestingly, you have to go out and buy your own mailbox. You have to go out and put your own cockeyed mailbox in the ground. But if somebody comes along and whacks it, now all of a sudden the president's upset, right? It's a federal crime, right? He didn't do any of the work. Also, If you're having a bad day and you get your mail and all you have are bills and you walk outside and you slug your mail carrier, what happens to you? Charged with simple assault and battery? No, 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 no. You just laid your hands on a federal employee out doing their federal employee kind of business. And it is if you struck the nation itself. Bad. I mean, they're not quite going to charge you with treason, but you are going to be in a lot of trouble because we understand that a messenger comes with the authority of the one who sent the message. And in this case, the mail carrier represents, to a point, the nation itself carrying around mail somewhat safely. So sometimes in the Bible, we'll see these situations where it says, the angel of the Lord spoke and said to me. And then all of a sudden it switches to the Lord. Or vice versa, it says the Lord spoke and said, and the angel of the Lord said. And or the in when Moses was leading the people of Israel, it says the Lord led the people of Israel by fire during the day and cloud during the night. And then maybe it's vice versa. And then other times it says the angel of the Lord led the people of Israel. And you wonder, well, which is it? Is it the angel of the Lord or is it the Lord? Doesn't matter. If God sent an angel to do a job, that angel went with all the authority of the presence of and invested power of the Lord himself, as much as he wanted to put on that angel. And so the angels get treated with the reverence and respect due to the Lord because of whom they represent. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. All right, let's talk about the weird, wacky stuff that Sandy brought up. So I want you to think about the object lessons that you remember from the prophets. Let's talk about those. Remember the object lessons? What's that? The dirty underwear. There's the dirty underwear object lesson. Do you remember anything about that? Yeah, right. God says to Jeremiah, go out and get yourself a nice, fresh new pair of underpants, right? It's a loincloth. Go get yourself a nice linen loincloth. And you're just thinking, I could use some nice underwear. So he goes out and he gets himself some nice, comfy underwear. And then the Lord says, okay, take the underwear for a walk. And he goes on a big, long walk and up by another river. And then God says, all right, now take it out and go down by the river's edge and stuff it into the rocks. And then God sends him back after a while. And God says, how are your brand new underpants now? Right? And he takes out the fresh loincloth, or what had been a fresh loincloth that now has, just quite a bit of walking in a desert and climate on it, right? And you think at that point they're not fresh. And then they get stuck between the rocks, and presumably the river comes up and the river goes down, right? And think about how this summer with the flooding, right? How things looked on streets and places like that when the rivers would rise and the river would go down. And then God says, how's that underwear? It's not good for anything. And he compares that to the people of Israel or the people of Judah. That's how they seem to me. What else? Anybody remember another one? And the dirty underwear was in, where'd it go? Jeremiah 13. Yes, it's even worse than that. And God actually relents of the dung, but the original command is to cook your food, make cakes over dung. And he's like, Lord, I can't do that. I'm a priest. I've never done anything unclean. He's like, all right, it's over human dung. He was supposed to do it over his own dung. And then God says, all right, you can use cow dung. And he's like, whew, right? Because cow dung that's people around the world, they cook with dung. in a lot of places where wood is not readily available. So yeah, God says to him to lay down on the ground. Well, first he says to build a little city. He makes a little city, and then he tells him to lay down on the ground for 390 days on his left hand side. 390 days, and basically look at this little siege, and he's allowed to drink water, he can collect water, and he can cook his food one-handed over the dung that's there, and in order to symbolize the years of punishment for the people of Israel. And then he says, after 390 days, you can flip over on the other side for 40 days, and you'll for the years of punishment for the people of Jerusalem. So over a year laying on his side. Pretty wild, right? Imagine the people walking by. What are you doing? There's another one. Ezekiel has another one. I don't think we looked at it, but it was another one. It follows right after the siege of Jerusalem one. It's Ezekiel chapter 5. He tells Ezekiel to take a sharp sword, cut off all of his hair and all of his beard, and then measure it out equally with a scale, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And then in the city, take a third of the hair and burn it. And then go out, this is wild, go out around the city, and with the sword, hack at the hair. Throw the hair around and slice at it. And then to take 1/3 of the hair and throw it up into the wind and let the wind blow it away. And God says to him, this is because of the punishment that is going to come upon Jerusalem when Nebuchadnezzar's armies come in. 1/3 of the people are going to die in the city. 1/3 of the people will be taken by the sword, and 1/3 of the people will be scattered. Imagine watching Ezekiel. Why is he naked? Not naked. He's not taking it. That's Isaiah. Gave one away. Why is he laying on his side with his action figures out there playing with a city? That's weird. Ezekiel, what are you doing? And he tells you, you're nuts. And then a little while later, he's cutting off all of his hair and running around outside the city with a sword, chopping it up. You're nuts. They would have thought he was nuts. I just mentioned being naked. That was Isaiah. God called Isaiah to walk around and prophesy naked, although a lot of people think that he might have been wearing a loincloth. But either way, right? You walk around the cities and towns of Vermont in your underpants or naked for 3 years. Either one is not going to be comfortable, right? God calls him to walk around the cities and towns of Judah for 3 years prophesying, either naked or in a loincloth. That can't be comfortable. That must be wild. And what else did we have? Oh, Jeremiah, remember the yoke? Right? God calls Jeremiah to go and carve himself a yoke, put himself in the yoke, an ox's yoke, not a person's yoke, right? A yoke is used to lift heavy objects. It goes over your shoulders. We carve or an ox wears it to pull a plow or a cart or whatever. Put on an ox's yoke and walk around prophesying in that because of the yoke of Nebuchadnezzar that's going to come on Jerusalem. And he does that for, it looks like, perhaps up to 5 months before the false prophet Hananiah takes it off and breaks it. So, which one of those weird, wacky object lessons do you think is the worst? Laying on your side one, that seems kind of crampy, doesn't it? As a 52-year-old man, that seems like a nightmare to me. I can't get comfortable at night and on my bed with memory foam. I can't imagine laying out on the streets or in the dirt. That'd be miserable. Anybody else? Preaching naked, yeah. I've had some nightmares about that one. I'm sure you can imagine, and now you will too. What else? Anything else? Dirty underwear. Janice values her clean underwear. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Walk around with his own. Imagine walking around with your own underwear, displaying it. Hey guys, this is you. No, your face, kind of thing, right? Like, man, awful. All right, let's go take a peek at Hosea. So hold on to your seats. So the Hosea is the first of the minor prophets. When we say minor prophets, it doesn't mean that they're unimportant, and it doesn't also mean that their books are actually short. Some of them are very short, one chapter, some 2, 3 chapters. Hosea is 14 chapters, but the chapters are shorter than we find like in say Daniel, which Daniel is I think just as many chapters, but much longer accounts. Um, Hosea preaches from probably about 760 BC to 710, and that makes him a contemporary of Isaiah. Um, so Isaiah 1:1 says, "The vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah." And Hosea 1:1 says, "The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, the king of Israel." So you can see they mention the same kings of Judah. Um, what does Hosea's introduction tell us about Hosea's call to ministry? Right. It seems like he's probably a prophet to both Israel and Judah. Most of the prophets were on either one or the other. And you'll remember that Israel and Judah, after the time of Solomon, they effectively had a civil war. And the northern tribes, 10 tribes to the north, the king there, his name was Jeroboam, he quickly realized that he needed to do something different about worship of Yahweh in Israel. Otherwise, the people from Israel that were going to worship Yahweh would just keep on going down to the temple like they were supposed to and worship God in another country. And we can't have that because of our tax money, right? And we can't have that because we don't want our people leaving our country a couple times a year to go worship down with those jerks down in Jerusalem. So he said, "I know what I'll do." The first thing he did was he made golden calves because it worked so well the last time before. And he takes those golden calves and he puts one in the northern part of the country and one in the southern part of the country. And he says to the people of Jerusalem, the people of Israel, "Here are your gods who led you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." Don't. Bad idea. Very much like Aaron did, right? It's like the same sin all over again. If you don't know your history, you will repeat it. And then he has another problem. Well, who's going to serve as a priest? Because the Levites are all devoted to God. So the Levites won't work at these with these idols. That won't work. So he sells the priesthood and basically sets it up so that you can come and pay me, pay the king, pay the kingdom, whatever, pay the country to be a priest of Yahweh, these bull gods, even using the same name for God. You come and be the priest of these bull gods, and then you can make a profit working as a priest. Um, so that and from that time on, Israel goes down a very rapid decline. There are no good kings in Israel. None. Um, and the result, of course, with there being no good kings in Israel, it goes downhill very, very fast. So we're going to read. And some folks that because Hosea lived at the time that Israel was defeated by the Assyrians. So some scholars think, and I think it's fair, a fair assumption that during Hosea's lifetime, he left Israel and moved down to Judah. And that is why his prophecies are preserved, because he left either before the invasion or after the invasion and moved down to Judah. And that's why he has both kings of Israel mentioned and kings of Judah prophesied in both places. Any questions, comments, queries, concerns, conundrums about that? All right, let's read Hosea chapter 1, verses. We'll start at verse 1. We'll just repeat that and read right through verse 3. So Hosea is the first of the minor prophets. He comes right after the book of Daniel. And he's 14 chapters long, so he's one of the easier ones to find. Hosea chapter 1, we'll start at verse 1, read right through verse 3. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, Go, take to yourself a wife of whoredom, and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. All right. So what is God's command to Hosea? Go. Hillary struggled with that one. It's a Bible word. What do you know? The words you didn't know were in the Bible, right? It's go take a wife who's a whore. Some texts will some translations say go take an adulterous wife. There are all kinds of ink is spilt about what kind of woman Gomer was when he went and married her. Was she working as a prostitute? Was she known for sleeping around? Was she a young woman? Was she an older woman? All kinds of questions are asked. We just had all the information that is present. So anything else is speculative. Yeah. And so, do you have any objections? What are your objections? Doesn't seem like the start of a good marriage, right? God just literally said to Hosea, what? Go have yourself a crappy marriage. Yeah. Yeah, it does seem like the opposite of what we would expect God to say, right? God usually tells us to separate ourselves from that kind of behavior. He says, "Get away." And in this, God's saying, "Go marry her," and that's what makes this so different from almost everything else we have seen in Scripture. You don't think so? It's a visual. Yeah, so you're catching that pretty quick. That it's a visual. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. See, it's like God calling Abraham to kill his son. So it's at first I think it's shocking, but then when we sit back a little bit, we go, "Hang on, run around naked, not run around naked, prophesy naked, lay on your side, wear an ox yoke, have your dirty underpants, sacrifice your son." Maybe sometimes God calls us to some outrageous stuff, right? Um, so let's read verses 4 through 9. So it says there in verse 3, so he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, call his name Jezreel, for in just a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. She conceived and bore a daughter, and the Lord said to him, call her name No Mercy, for I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them at all. But I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and I will save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them by bow or by sword or by war or by horses or by horsemen. When she had weaned no mercy, she conceived and bore a son. And the Lord said, call his name not my people, for you are not my people, and I am not your Lord. All right, so what is the name of Hosea's firstborn child? Jezreel. What's significant about it? He's named after a massacre, right? Not just one massacre, actually. Jezreel is a pretty common battleground in Israel, and you see it mentioned a number of times. It's also the place where when King Saul wanted to buy Naboth's vineyard. Naboth lived in Jezreel, the valley of Jezreel, and Naboth didn't want to sell it because it was his family inheritance. And he said, "How can I give you, what is my family's inheritance from the Lord?" And Saul got all grumpy and upset and was moping around. And Jezebel, his wife, who was just nasty, she says, "What are you so upset about? You're the king. If you want to, go get it." So he kills Naboth, takes his vineyard, Jezreel. Also, you'll notice here in the text, he said that God said that the house of Jehu was going to have was going to be punished for the massacre that happened in Jezreel. And what happened was Jehu was one of the kings of Israel. He was sort of on line to be a good king. God called him specifically. God also called the first Jeroboam, called him specifically to be king and to bring punishment down upon the house of Omri. And the house of Omri included King Ahab. And Jehu is responsible for killing a whole bunch of people, including, I believe, Jezebel, in the valley of Jezreel. But now God is sending punishment upon the house of Jehu for what they did in Jezreel, which is most likely because as soon as Jehu did what God told him to do in order to get power, Jehu abandoned the Lord, did what God called him to do, and then decided to use what God had given him for his own purposes. And so now I tend to interpret it as now God's bringing him punishment for sort of using the Lord for his own purposes. It would be so naming this. It would be like um, naming your child York or Gettysburg or Chernobyl or something like that. Like what? Auschwitz. Naming your child Auschwitz, right? Just like a place of destruction. That's what God did. Now, how about the second two children? What changes with the other two? What are their names, and what is God saying to Israel? Do you see what changes? There's a subtle change in the wording. More a verb. It might not. The wording might not be reflected quite as well if you're using NIV. Okay, the names are applicable to the whole nation, right? The first child's name is what? Okay, so tell me a little bit about no mercy. What does it say in verse 6? Read it for me. Okay. Read verse 3. Read like the very end of verse 3, the last. She conceived and bore him a son, it says in verse 3. Now read the first sentence in verse 6. Read it for me. She conceived again and bore a daughter in verse 6. And read verse 8. Okay, now read the tail end of verse 3. No, it's not the weaned. We're missing one word. Verse 3 has a word. It's a short 3-letter word. It starts with the letter H that doesn't exist in the other 2 verses. Him. Verse 3 makes it clear that Gomer's firstborn child, Jezreel, is Hosea's son. Verses 6 and 8 make it unclear whether those children are Hosea's children or not. See that? She conceived and bore a son. What kind of wife is she? She's an adulteress. We like that word better, right? She's an adulterous wife. Kind of. And I think the implication from the text as well is Hosea knows. So then God says, name this second daughter No Mercy, and name this second son Not My People. I heard a story when I was a kid. I don't know if it was true or not. I remember I was young. We were living in Milford, and I remember I was going down West Street in Milford when this person said to me that they'd heard about a parent who named their child Zero. Named their child Zero. Imagine that. Imagine if your name was Zero. What do your parents think of you? Not much. Zero. Imagine naming your kid grows up and they realize their name means not my people. Like how long, when does it occur to the child that when you're saying, lower me, it's time for dinner, when all of a sudden your child goes, why is dad calling me not my people? Or your daughter says, why is dad calling me No Mercy? Imagine. I mean, I don't think that we're dealing with toddlers for the entirety of the book of Hosea. We're certainly not dealing with toddlers for the entirety of their life. And that's their name. That's kind of hard hitting, huh? So what is God saying to the people of Israel and these 2 children, or these 3 children? Yeah, like Pilate, who washes his hands like Pilate. I am going to bring destruction on you without mercy because you are not my people. I have no relationship with you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, pretty rough. When that's in Gospel of John, chapter 10, somewhere around there. Jesus says to the Pharisees, "You guys are of your father, the devil." What a slap in the face! What a slap in the face! These kids are growing up with that, and the people all around are hearing that. And Hosea is most likely recognized as a prophet. All right, so let's take a look at verses 10 through 11, because fortunately, 10 to 11 comes a little nicer. So verse 10 says, "Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God. And the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint for themselves one head, and they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. So what does God promise? Yeah, a restoration and a reversal, right? You were called not my people. You're going to be called children of the living God. And did he say something about the? Uh, yeah, he didn't say anything like "You are not my people." He didn't say anything about there being no mercy, but that seems to be included. You get this sense that the ones upon whom God had no mercy, He's going to give grace. He's going to bring blessing. The time will come. The time will come. Absolutely. Absolutely. God's reiterating the covenant that he made with Abraham, right? Because God said, if the day comes when I will take my blessing off this people, when I will not fulfill my covenant to you, Abraham, then may I be like these like these cut up animals, which most of us would take as a reference to the cross. Um, where are we? All right, so let's take a look. Any other comments about that? God promised. I think it's awesome. God, right there, misery, misery, misery that you deserve. God promises a reversal, God or a restoration. Let's take a look at chapter 2. So chapter 2, we're going to read verses 1 through 13. It's all in verse. It's all prophetic, but I want us to read it and to hear it and to get a sense of it. Say to your brothers, you are my people, and to your sisters, you have received mercy. Plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. That she put away her whoring from her face and her adultery from between her breasts, lest I strip her naked and make her as in the day she was born, and make her like a wilderness, and make her like a parched land, to kill her with thirst. Upon her children also I will have no mercy, because they are the children of whoredom. For their mother has played the whore. She who conceived them has acted shamefully. For she said, I will go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink. Therefore I will hedge up her way with thorns, and I will build a wall against her, so that she cannot find her paths. She shall pursue her lovers, but not overtake them, and she shall seek them, but not find them. Then she shall say, I will go and return to my first husband, for it was better for me than than now. And she did not know that it was I who gave her the grain, the wine, and the oil, and who lavished on her silver and gold, which they used for Baal. Therefore, I will take back my grain in its time, and my wine in its season, and I will take away my wool and my flax, which were to cover her nakedness. Now I will uncover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and no one shall rescue her out of my hand. And I will put an end to all her mirth, her feasts, her new moons, her Sabbaths, and all her appointed feasts. And I will lay waste her vines and her fig trees, of which she said, These are my wages, which my lovers have given me, and I will make them a forest, and the beast of the field shall devour them. And I will punish her for the feast days of the Baals, when she burned offerings to them and adorned herself with her ring and jewelry, and went after her lovers and forgot me, declares the Lord. So, um, I know that was a lot to read, but how does chapter 2 inform our understanding of God's command to Hosea? What's chapter 2 telling us? What's it giving us an image of? God is the husband, and, and Israel's the adulterous wife, right? And who are the lovers that Israel has been chasing after? They're false gods, right? And the main false, they say Baals here, which is interesting. There was the god or Baal or Baal, but also there were, I don't know if it's best to call them different aspects of Baal or different manifestations of Baal, or there were all these different Baals or whatever. But there were a number of different ways that Baal was referred to, with still Baal as part of the name, and so Baal or these Baals get used as sort of a reference to all the false gods, not only Baal in particular and all these other little Baals, but all the false gods that the people of Israel worshipped. Yeah, lots of gods. Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, very similar. So how has how has Israel had adultery with these balls? Yeah, right. Yes, exactly. So God had given the people of Israel the land. This is your land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, right? And Palestine is, as part of the Fertile Crescent, some of the most, well, fertile land in the Middle East. It's beautiful land and was constantly fought over, and continues to be fought over today because it's a breadbasket. And so the people of Israel, instead of thanking God for their crops, right, they thank Baal for their crops, and they thank Ashtoreth for their crops, and they pray to them for a good season next year and worship them. Just like, he says you went after your lovers, to get your payment of your flax and your gold and your this and that, but I was the one that gave it to you. I was the one that provided it for you, and you went after them instead. Um, and so, what does he say he will do? Hmm. Basically, take it all away. Basically, just take it all away, and then you'll be this. I'll uncover your nakedness. I'll uncover your lewdness. You'll find yourself embarrassed because you've lost what you had, and it'll be gone. Yeah, I will punish her. Hmm. Um, and we've already talked about why God calls Hosea to marry Gomer, because it's a living example. Hosea is going through all the same torment, heartache that God has been going through. Uh, let's look at verses 14 through 15. I should pick it up because my eyesight's not that good. All right. Therefore, behold, check this out. Therefore, behold, I will allure her. I will bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. And there I will give her her vineyards and make the valley of Achor a door of hope. And there she shall answer as in the days of her youth, as at the time when she came up out of the land of restoration, right? But man, she's been an adulterous wife to me. She's gone off and done her own thing, and I'm angry, and I'm going to take away from her everything I provided for her. But then I'm going to go win her back. I am going to go win her love. Well, it's tough. Yeah, it's tough, but it, it man, so often, and I think rightly so, when we exhibit tough love to somebody, we put up the wall, and when they're ready to come knocking back at the door, we will let them in. Right? That's most of the time what we do with tough love. With this tough love, God says, I'm going to put up the wall and I'm going to stand inside it. But when the time is right, I am going to open the door and I am going to go find her. And I'm going to convince her that she wants to come home. I'm going to speak tenderly to her. It's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. But wait, there's more. We have a couple more minutes, so we'll just hit one more passage. Let's look at verses 16 through 20. And what my treasure? Very interesting. Go right to. Let me see. Yeah, we'll go right to 20. I think we'll stop there for today. And in that day declares the Lord, you will call me my husband, and will no longer call me my Baal. For I will remove the names of the Baals from her mouth, and they shall be remembered by name no more. And I will make for them a covenant on that day with the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, and the creeping things of the ground. And I will abolish the bow and the sword and war from the land, and I will make you lie down in safety, and I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice, in steadfast love and mercy. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. So what does he say in those couple of verses to the people of Israel? Well, let's start with this. What does he say that they've been doing in verse 16? He says you're going to do what from now on? Instead of it says my master there. Okay, so that's an interesting trick, or not trick, but thing. So the Baal is the word master. That's what the name means. That name of that god. So that's an interesting decision they've made. Translation decision. So the question becomes one of two things. I think so. Well, I'll tell you what. So they're saying that the relationship between Israel and God is going to change. I think that what God is saying, in those days, your worship of me is going to change because your worship's going to be of me. And effectively, what God is saying is that when the people of Israel have thanked Baal for providing them with their food or their crops or their herds or whatever, it's the equivalent of, we're all adults, making love with your spouse and whispering the wrong name in their ear. You shall call me my husband and no longer call me my Baal or Baal. You're not going to make that mistake anymore. I think it's effectively that's what God says they've been doing. By thanking Baal for what I've given you, you've been whispering the wrong name in my ear. Now, it is totally possible as well that I think maybe using NIV has it right. And they're saying the relationship's going to change and you're going to call me my husband. It's going to be a relationship of intimacy that you have with me and not feel a relationship of requirement. I also think that both both can be true as well. I can ride the fence on that one pretty easily. So that's number one. What else does he say they'll do? Or what else does he say will happen? Yeah, those names will be gone. You won't even think about them anymore. You'll love me with such devotion that you will not think about your past sins. Mm. So I will abolish the bow, the sword, and war, and you will dwell in safety. At this time, Israel has been getting picked apart. The reign of Jeroboam II was a pretty long reign and reasonably good for the people of Israel because for a while their enemies were weak. But that was a comparatively short period to the whole period of time of the reign of the house of Jehu. It's about, well, I should say it's about half of it. So about half the time of the reign of the house of Jehu, there was reasonable peace, but only because the enemies had internal conflict. Once that internal conflict was gone, things went back to normal, where the nations around were picking off chunks of the land of Israel and incorporating them into their own nations, until finally the threat of war is no longer a threat of war, and armies and chariots are marching over their land and destroying their fields. And so God says, I said, I'm giving you a land flowing with milk and honey. I'm giving you a land that is desirable. It's a land that's been fought over and continues to be fought over today. In that day, you will lay down in peace. The sword and the bow will be gone. You won't have to worry about it. It's a pretty awesome promise to make to a nation that's been cheating on him for generations. So we'll end there today. Any other comments for today? We'll pick up where we left off next week. All right. Well, let me close this in a word of prayer. Boop. Father, thank you very much for today and for this chance to get together. And now, Lord, for this heavy-hitting book of Hosea. God, I pray that even as we look upon the guilt of Israel and perhaps see guilt, our own guilt, that we will also see the love and mercy that you give to your children. In Jesus' name, amen.